Good morning, Jody dear.
Yes, Pat Brady. Many people call you Brady.
Yes, still.
It's like your first name. Your first name. I presume your parents came from Ireland.
A good guess. Yes, they did come from Ireland. They originally, both my mother and father came from the northern part of Ireland, Ulster, which was at that time under British control and still to this day is. It's not part of the Republic of Ireland, but they're all Irish. And so anyway, they...
Did they meet in Ireland?
No, actually, my father was from Rathfriland in County Down, and my mother was from Tyrone in Ireland. And these counties were quite separate from one another. So they encountered one another in Canada because both of them immigrated to Canada. My father came from a family of 12 poor people, farm people. My mother lost her mother in childbirth when she was 4 years old, and the father couldn't handle the two girls that were the younger in the family. The older boys could take care of themselves. But anyway, he sent them out to live with two aunts. So my Aunt Rose and my mother were sent out to different places to live. And my mother ended up with an aunt and an uncle who didn't have very much money, but they took care of her. But they got sick, and she ended up taking care of them a lot.
What motivated them to leave Ireland?
Yes. Well, the thing is, leaving Ireland was a necessity, as it is with most immigrants. They loved Ireland, but there was no workforce there at all. There just wasn't any future. So my father left when he was 17 and came to Canada. That was easier to go to Canada and to immigrate from Ireland to Canada than it would be to go directly to the United States. My mother left Ireland at 19, and neither of them had much of an education. My mother to the 3rd grade, my father to the 7th. And so here they were in Canada, and it is in Canada. My mother was working. Her brothers had come over earlier, the older brothers, and they had kind of a rooming house. And anyway, my father ended up there, and he met my mother, and the rest is history.
Oh my.
They were married in Montreal. My oldest brother, Frank, was born in Toronto. And then my father left my mother and Francis, in Toronto so he could get a job in Chicago. Of course, this is Depression time, and he had really no background. And he took menial jobs for a couple of years, and then he was able to land a job with the Chicago Transit Authority, which is history to our family.
Yes.
And when he got that job, then my mother and Frank came over to Chicago. And he stayed with the Chicago Transit Authority for the next 4 years. He was a streetcar conductor, motorman, bus driver, and he also then in the later years worked in what they called the barns. So anyway, for 40 years. And my mother and they had 6 children.
6.
And the one born after Frank was Kevin Joseph. And Kevin Joseph lived to about a year and a half, and he died with diphtheria. And then there's 2 years later, my mother was expecting again, and they expected it would be a boy to replace Kevin. And in fact, it turned out to be a girl, me. And they had the name chosen, John, and so what were they going to name the girl? And I was born on the 12th of March, so obviously 5 days to St. Patrick's Day, so I was Patricia. And so my father, when he got a job there in the CTA, the one thing that was very important in my early days was that he also had an interest, as all immigrants do, to better themselves. And his way of doing that was they finally purchased a house, and that was the beginning of a side career for him. It was flip-flop from the Home and Garden Show, done 1920 style. So he would buy a house and then fix it up. He was very handy, sell the house for more money than he paid, and this became a routine for the rest of his life. He even became a real estate agent with his education and everything. But he was very talented and had the grit to know that you had to really step up if you wanted to do something. So
you were born in Chicago.
I was
then.
born in Chicago, and after me, younger brother Danny, born 2 years later, and then my mother had 2 births when she was 40 and 42. And those are my 2 younger sisters, Colleen and Mary. I was in 6th grade when Colleen was born, and 8th grade when Mary was born. And so, and our lives were pretty much all the way through a lot of moving. I went to, I really went to 3 schools, but there were a couple of others we didn't stay long enough that I would even identify with. But I went to school at St. Felicitas in Chicago, and Danny went there as well. And I had the IHMs from Monroe, which interestingly enough would have a full circle for me in my life. And then and they moved around in St. Felicitas Parish. That's how we got to stay there. He'd fix houses there, and we'd move around there. Then in 6th grade, I went over to Little Flower in Chicago to the Mercies. And then finally in 7th and 8th grade, we came across the city to the southwest side, where the parish that I attended, the school, was a block away from where we were. By the way, the house by this time was really nice. 5 bedrooms, it was a really nice place. We were a block and a half from St. Killian's, which was the first encounter with the Adrian Dominican Sisters. And
so you stayed with them for now close to 70 years.
Yes. And when I had them in 7th and 8th grade, I had John Ellen and Rose Giralda, and Marie Urban Schwartz was the other 8th grade teacher, and Eileen Marie Ryan from the old sod was the principal of the school, and of course when they invited people over to Aquinas to their school, which was an hour and a half from where I lived, I really wanted to go to Aquinas, and it was near St. Felicitas, so I did know about Aquinas from early on. And the girl next door, she went to Aquinas, and she had a gold and black jacket, and I thought, oh, wouldn't that be nice to have that jacket? So whatever, it was kind of disputed with my father.
Because of the distance.
Yes, because I had to take a bus an hour and a half, and my father thought if I went to the Academy of Our Lady run by the Sisters of Notre Dame, I could walk up there, and then I could come home, and I could help take care of the house, which was not exactly what I wanted to do. So anyway, I somehow talked them into going over to Aquinas, and that, of course, had a major bearing on what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
That's why you were such a good debater in high school.
Oh, yes, I did. And I learned about critical thinking skills early on. Yes, I was in sophomore year, and Marie Dorothy Capelman was the English teacher, and I had no idea what that was all about, debate and forensics and all that, but I did get in that. And I'll tell you, through my years of teaching high schools, a lot of what I learned at Aquinas I was able to just put to really good use. But it was there that I really decided that I had a real attraction to the Adrian Dominican congregation. And I think in my whole early life, there was something about being called to do something special to serve God. I remember being in St. Felicitas Church one time when I was very young and looking up at it was a statue of Mary holding Jesus in her arms after his death. And I remember saying to this little girl, I'd like to serve you someday, just kind of say that, as little kids would. Now, that didn't mean I carried on as a prayerful person, but I was, I liked to go to church, and my mother liked to make all the novenas, and I'd go with her. So the Catholic Church was part of it. But I did not meditate on this at Aquinas, and I was one of the last ones from our group of 12 who came to Adrian.
12?
12 of us came, yes.
Wow.
And we were very, when I think of it, Jody, we were very inspired by the people who went before us. I mean, Donna Custard, Ann Guinan, Jean Hughes, Jean Tobin. I'm going to miss a lot of names, but these were the people at Aquinas that we looked up to that were ahead of us. So it was not unusual to have a lot. And of the 12, there's 6 of us who stayed the full 60 years. And I think it was a given that this was a realistic option for people to go to choose the priesthood or religious life, so it was not unusual.
Are any of your classmates, when they enter the same time you do, are they on campus now?
Yes, and I'm going to probably forget a name now.
Yeah, but that's okay.
There's 6, Helen McAllister and Fran Lombard. Eunice and Janet are off campus. and I'm leaving one person out, but it'll come to me. But
Yeah.
and we get together as a crowd often, and so. But the Chicago group has always been very close. And
when did you come to Weber Center? How long have you been?
I've been
living
here
there?
7 months.
7 months.
Yeah, 7 months now.
Oh,
And
coming from where?
from New Orleans. I was down in New Orleans for 8 years, working as the director of the Dominican High School Association.
Which meant?
Which meant that during my earlier life, after I had been in leadership in one of the Chicago chapters, along with Joella Miller, I had this idea. I went to France for that retreat in Fanjot.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was there, I was kind of thinking, after I got out of leadership, what do I want to do next? And so when I was there, I remember when you look from Fanjot down on Pruy, you see that place where Dominic saw the globe of light and knew that he was supposed to invite, of course, the women to be the first Dominicans. And I thought, when I was up there, and I thought there was such a beautiful place, and that's a place where Dominic went down each day for daily mass with him. And I simply asked God, I said, I really am not sure what I want to do. I had been in high school teaching and loved it, and in high school administration. But I just thought, what's the next thing? And so I left it at that. But when I got back to the United States, it was apparent that there was something about Dominican high schools. And also our call for people to become members of our congregation, we were beginning to see a real time on that. And I thought one of the reasons was when we went and attended those schools, we really had contact with young people, and we didn't have that contact a lot anymore. So I thought, well, I know that there are a lot of Dominican high schools because I'd been and met a lot of Dominicans who had high schools when I was in leadership, which helped me a lot. And so I thought, well, why don't we try and get some of these students from these high schools together and see if we can do something to let them know who we are as Dominicans. And so that was the beginning of the Dominican High School Preaching Conference. And I asked the general counsel at that time, Pat Walter, and that group, if I could be funded to maybe begin something. I wasn't sure what else would be connected with this, but could they let me go at this? And the decision was yes. A decision, by the way, that would continue through Janet Capone and Donna Markham. All the way through, I was getting that kind of support. So and then I went around and I asked somebody, where's the list of Dominican high schools? And they said, at the Dominican Leadership Conference, we don't have a list. So I contacted the congregations and found out that there were really about 25 Dominican high schools conducted by 13 different congregations of women. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what I did was make contact with these schools, and this happened kind of in the spring of the year of 1998, when I was supposed to be in sabbatical, but I was running around meeting leaders of these schools to tell them that wouldn't it be nice if we could plan a program. And they were very positive about it. And the short of that is real reception to it. And then I thought, well, an idea is an idea, and it only becomes something that's real if you get good people with you. Mm-hmm. So I asked Charlie Bouchard if he could get somebody from the preaching conference up there to kind of help in formulating a program.
He was a Dominican right there.
He was a president in St. Louis of Aquinas. And so anyway, then I got the campus ministers from the various Dominican high schools. Had a good turnout. Some of the presidents and principals even came to it because they were so interested in this. And I told them about what I had envisioned that would happen. And it was pretty academic. I was thinking credit that they'd get during the summer and everything. And the campus minister said to me, that's not going to work because it's too academic. And so together, we planned what would be a program of introducing them to the Dominican charism of the congregation, of our congregation, all the Dominicans all over the world. And the first year, we invited students in. That was 1999, so it was, this year will be the 19th year of the program.
Wow.
And 39 of them, we met at Queen of Peace High School. We had a turnout of, that original 39 is still in the picture, but that's the first time. Then, the next year, it got larger. We did it at Dominican University for several years, and then they told me at Dominican U that they could no longer, in the summer, have the program that year because they were building new dorms. And could we find another place? Well, I thought, where are we going to go? And they've been in Chicago. And, you know, once you've been to Chicago,
Yeah,
and Navy Pier and service projects all over the city. But I decided to try Adrian. I said, I don't know what they're going to do in the cornfields. And when they got to Adrian, there was no other choice. They loved Adrian. They loved our sisters. When we partnered them with sisters on our campus, which still is going on, they loved Holy Rosary Chapel. They loved the cornfields. In fact, when they took group pictures, they were all in the cornfield. So at the end, I said to them, should we go back to Chicago with the next group? They said, no, sister, stay here. So that went on, and now back to the original question you asked. It was once that got started, then my next goal was to reach another group, very important to the school community, the leaders themselves. And I kind of did the same thing. I got them from different schools.
Is that the principals and
principals
the
and the
boards?
presidents. And no, not so much boards. It was pretty much the people who were inside the school. And board did get involved later. But anyway, did the same thing. Got them together. And by 2001, we had created a board for what we hoped would be an association of these Dominican schools. And that became very well received. Excellent people, wonderful turnout. There were no no's in this at all. It was the right time. Remember, this is the time when Dominican congregations are beginning to move together.
Yes.
So it was time. And then the wonderful support, excellent board, and we got our, by 201, 202, we were already working towards incorporation. And we did become incorporated.
Really?
Yes, and they were in the Kennedy
congratulations.
book, and not anything.
What do you mean, Kennedy?
Well, all of the Catholic institutions, you have to be recognized by the diocese in which you are a member to be affiliated with the Catholic Church officially, and then you become an incorporated group, and then you can reach out to get money, grants, etc. For your program. If you don't have that, you can't get that status. So anyway, once we got that, then it mushroomed, and we ended up with all the schools from the United States in that. And by the time I worked with him for many years, stayed longer than I would have because I was always afraid. We didn't have enough money to have lay leadership at that point, and I thought, oh, well, if I go, as Sister Jane Meyer from Houston used to say, you're a dog with a bone. But I was just so afraid that we'd lose it. And in fact, we didn't. I left before I came here, 3 years before I came here, I retired. And Sister Kathleen Tate from Marian Catholic took over the position. And she said she'd stay for 3 years because her community wanted her to do a development program. So, but the nice part about it, and it's interesting that we're sitting here today, I received notification this summer, after Christmas in fact, that the DAS board had finally gotten a lay woman who would take over as the director of the program.
Congratulations.
Yes, and her name is Andrea. She has wonderful credentials. She lives in Grand Rapids, and that's where the office will now be situated. She's in her 30s, and she will be excellent. And Mary Margaret Pahuski met me a couple of weeks ago, and she said, Andrea, the new director, she said, you know, there's a new director. And I said, oh, yes, I had heard. And she said she wants to come to Adrian, and she would very much like to meet you. So this Friday, I'm going to meet this woman who will be our director. And now we can say that we frame this so that it will go on. So at this,
I need to stop and give you a round
thank
of
you,
applause.
thank you.
Really, how beautiful.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand when you say DAS. What is that?
Dominican Association of Secondary Schools.
Okay.
And it really is what has happened with that program. Remember, nothing by myself. None of this is always in concert. And I've loved bringing people together, so maybe that's the thing that's got it this far. But now it's, I think it has a future. The challenges for the Dominican Association of Secondary Schools is how we carry on the charism in our schools when there are no longer members of the sponsoring congregation present.
Have you seen some of that happen through
Yes.
the 19 years?
Yes, I have.
Oh,
And
for
well,
instance,
yes.
tell me
Well,
how it's
I was
expressed.
down in I did work out of in the whole first part of what I did. I worked out of my one of the bedrooms in the Westchester apartments that we own, and
my
I
heavens.
lived there, and we had the third bedroom, and I just had a computer, as so many people today, and you do it all through that. And I worked there for several years. But the board of DAS asked me, as we were moving towards someone else taking over leadership, and perhaps a layperson, if I would be willing to go to an office in a school. And I said, sure. But so I'll check out if you want me. So I went around Chicago. I thought it was going to be great. Six schools in the Chicago area. So I thought immediately I'll get into one of their schools, including our Regina Dominican, only to find that there wasn't any room in the inn. They didn't have any rooms. See, I always forget that in a high school setting, somebody's going to grab an empty space. Some department will want it, or some individual.
Fortunately, you ended up in
Yeah.
New Orleans.
Yes, I did. And the thing was, I had to go back to them, say there was no room in Chicago, and the board, there were raised hands, and they said, "We'll take you." I got an invitation from Houston,
Oh.
wonderful school there, from Memphis, and the third offering was from Cindy Thomas, who had already we had become friends, and she
She's in
said
New
New Orleans, and I said, "Oh, I think I can manage that." And so I went to New Orleans. I provided an office for me in the school, and I was delighted to be in New Orleans because at that time we had Mary Jones and Patty Harvath and Judy Zinda and Mary Keefe doing her wonderful program. So the Adrian Dominicans were a presence there. And it was there that I saw, back to your original question, a Dominican school that probably is one of the best in the country. I have to put it in the upper five. Dominican, so Dominican. And the thing about the Dominican charism, Jody, that I've always espoused is to sell the Dominican charism is an easy job. It is so appealing. That's why the young people have picked that up because it calls for you to be mission oriented, to have a relationship with God, to have a sense that you don't work by yourself, you're always in community, those four pillars we're getting to, we call them, and to know that you've got to know what you're talking about. And when we gave those kids, and then we transferred that to the school community, the adult part, it was always with the idea that you have a distinct mission, and we're going to help you to find out what it is, and God will reveal it to you during your life. And the kids think, we said to them, and we said to when we got into DAS, when we had convocations during those years of all the schools coming together, the last one we did in 2014 was preaching human dignity in our schools.
Oh, wow.
And so they came from all over for that. And it was being espoused by members of the faculty as well as the principals and presidents. And what it did was create a real, people knew one another, and they felt a support. And in New Orleans, what they did was really own it. And to the point that I thought they're more Dominican than Dominic was. I mean, they built this beautiful gymnasium, and in the middle of the floor, it has Veritas. And it was, the stands were all black and white. I mean, it was just, when these young people would come back from the high school preaching conference on the first faculty day, they were the first presenters of what they had said they were going to espouse to happen in the school. So it really caught on at St. Dominic's, a Dominican in New Orleans. It was very successful.
How did the college program begin?
Good, thank you. Yes.
Similar to the high
Yes,
school
it is.
program.
Jenna Fleming was in Amityville who was with us. By the way, Mary's so key on this also. She will become involved in the college thing. But Jenna was with the Amityvilles, and she wanted to do what I did. She wanted to be released from her position in school and start to do something with it on the East Coast. It was Jenna then who said, let's start this with colleges. And so within like 3 years after we had gotten high school programs going, then she started a college conference. And what's happened with the college conference, they've had about, I think they've been going about 15 years, can you imagine? And they meet in different colleges or universities where there's a Dominican presence. So it could be at Purdue, even though that's not Dominican, but there is a chaplains there who are Dominican. And they've had it at Siena several times, they've had it at Barry. And so that has been successful. From that, she started a young adult movement with people who may not have gone to any of these conferences, but kind of connected to parishes. And there is an international Dominican movement of young people, and she has taken groups.
Wow.
Mary Soher has gone with her and some of the other people to these international Dominican sessions. So it's out there and alive. The one thing I want to say about the future of all of this, it still needs money. And we have to figure out how we will make sure that all these organizations continue to really be part of what's happening in the future when we're not around. And I think with the high schools, we want to look at what they call a heuristic person to see if we can do more to bring them together. And with the youngsters, we've got to have, when Mary Sower finishes with the high school group, she's in her 9th year. I was with it 10 years. So is she going to, it can't go on forever. So then we've got to look for lay leadership from this group. And that may come from some of the people who are part of it right now who may be able to take it over. But that's going to be a big transition. And I noticed last year that the college could not have their annual conference, and it was a money situation. Prior to that, Jenna had worked through the Amityville Sisters to get all kinds of grants to support the effort, so the young people could come to these gatherings without such a cost that they wouldn't be able to attend.
I presume the schools pay the high school fees.
Yeah, but Catholic high schools generally are always looking for money, and they need the money to secure their position as a school community. And like for DAS, all those years, they were paying $1,000 a year. Well, that just kind of took care of, if they were going to hire, they paid me eventually a full price because they knew if a layperson were coming in, they'd have to have that money. But there wasn't a lot of extra money there to really build on. So I'm kind of going to be asking Andrea, is she getting paid? I'm sure she is. And have they decided, because once you get a layperson in leadership, you've got a lot of other, besides the salary itself, all other kinds of things have to be covered.
If I may, one last question. If Dominic was sitting in my chair right now, what would you want to say or ask him?
Well, I wouldn't want to, I certainly would be delighted. I hope I do meet Dominic. I'm under that garment where all the other Dominicans are. But, I think the one thing I want to say, I wouldn't want to ask him anything. I just want to tell him how grateful I am, and not only to him, but to the great saints and to the many unheralded saints in our Dominican congregations and among the men and women in the Dominican order. Thank you for starting an order in the church that makes so much sense that it can go from 12th to 13th century up to the 21st century and still engage people as a wonderful way to pursue their life with meaning and with God at the center of that life. And I really would. I think he you talk about that, seeing him come out with that flame in his mouth. He really had something. And sometimes when I hear about other people's charism, I think, I'm not sure I could sell that. But with the Dominicans, it is that. So that's what I would do. And I hope we're all together. And as the kids, one of the students said early on, he said, this Veritas stuff is really, really something else in this Disputatio. He said, he was from one of the high schools, major high school, and his school was right on the campus. But he said to me, sister, when I go back, I'm going to have a conference with the principal there and kind of get her into this. But it's that kind of cell product that was very part of it. Yeah. And back to New Orleans, when you'd meet these kids, and they would be up every single mass that was offered, the school masses, which happened on feast days, etc., at the end of each mass, they didn't do the homily, but there was always a preaching moment coming from one of the young preachers addressing the student body, and that was just an expected thing. Patty Harvath did a wonderful job carrying through on that, and Mary Jones before her, so it's good.
We began by saying your life started with the IHMs, our Raisin River friends.
Yes.
And today they're part of your life too.
Well, they are. It's kind of funny. I'm wearing the blue.
Yeah.
I always love those blue and black outfits. I never thought of that when I was getting dressed this morning. So I got to get over here. But yes, certainly I had them in school. And then when I was at Lansing Catholic Central, the two schools in this town merged, and it was terrible. And they needed someone great to come in. And guess who came? Sister Pat Guthrie, rest in peace.
Oh my.
She was an IHM sister, and she said to the group of the two faculties, we got to do something. One was traditional, one was innovative in a Trump program, and she said, we have to decide which way we're going to go. And when she did that, she decided we'd go the innovative way. She stayed with it. She's wonderful. And I stayed with her until someone said, do you ever think of administration in schools? And I said, no, I like teaching high school. But anyway, they did ask me to go down to Florida, to Tampa, with Julie Sullivan. And I was at Tampa Catholic interning in administration for a couple of years. And then when I went back there, I was kind of saying, what about this administration thing? Well, Pat Guthrie knew. She said, I think I'm going to lose you. They'll want to have you take over one of these schools. And she called me when I got one time, and she said, you know what, Pat? She said, there is an opening at an IHM high school in Westchester, Illinois. I said, I don't have a clue where Westchester, Illinois. I never heard of it. It's near Cicero and Berwyn, that area. I've certainly learned where it was. And she said, there's a sister here who taught at Siena, and she said, I think you would be a good combo. They want co-principals, co-administrators in this, which I didn't like the title of. I thought somebody should be principal and have your associates, which we ended up doing. But anyway, that was Jane Farrell, IHM, and I went in to interview with the IHM council. They did the interviewing, and I was hired. They asked me if I'd take the job that day. And then Jane and I, no background really officially in education administration. She had been in college, taught high school. I taught high school, and we realized we could never run a school because we were missing the person who knew all about curriculum and knew how to make a schedule. Marilee Ewing came on board. We were saved. And for 3 years, we worked with the IHM congregation in their school for 10 years, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'm always will see that as something very special. So the IHMs, and it really prepared me because my whole life I never was prepared for anything I was doing. I always got prepared after the fact. Going to Michigan State, getting a degree in English after I did it, going to Boston College after all the administration was already finished, getting a degree there. So, but it was all meant to be. And sometimes the nice thing about not knowing what you're doing, I heard this week from somebody, it's something we were listening to, that the wonderful thing about teaching is that you become a learner.
Yes.
And is that not the case? So with all of it, we must be
We
into an hour.
Yes.
And
Well,
I just
thank you
want
for
to,
your time.
I want to say something publicly to people about you.
Oh, my
You
heavens.
are one of the most gifted people in our congregation, Jody, in so many ways. I admire and love you for all you've done. And I think the creation of this program, that's why I knew I had to come on board. It is such a good idea. And what I don't think I've ever heard of anybody ever doing anything like this, and how it has helped us as an Adrian congregation to hear the stories of our women. You know, we hear them when they die. This past week, this Sister Dorita and this Sister Mary, I didn't know either of them, but to hear what they've accomplished in their lives, and then to know that your program, and I know I asked you this last week, 200 of our sisters' stories are historically in place forever. and thanks.
In the archives.
In the archives, but to always
Yeah.
be part of who we are in a different way than just reading a blank sheet of paper of what they did in their lives. So
Thank you,
thank you
Pat.
so much.
Thank
God
you.
bless you, my dear friend.
Thank you.
Yes, God.